Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Can you please rise as we welcome the procession inside the venue? Thank you.
You may be seated. Hi everyone, good evening and welcome to this inaugural professorial lecture of Professor Pieter Fourie, who I'm going to introduce to you all. It is indeed my great pleasure tonight to introduce Pieter Fourie, a scholar, author, and thought leader. He completed his doctoral degree at King's College in London and the University of Johannesburg. His undergraduate and then his honors, she graduated with cum laude, same for his masters, are from this esteemed institution. He also holds and I'm going to try and pronounce it correctly in French, a cycle du diplôme, programme international d'encadrement à la recherche, from the Institut d'études politiques de Paris. So that is in the political science fraternity, it's Sciences Po. Now, of him it cannot be said that he stayed in one place. He moved around quite a bit. After doing a stint as a researcher in the Political Science Center for International and Comparative Politics, he took a position as a senior research officer in the Political and Economic section of the Australian High Commission in Pretoria. It's probably that connection that made him go to Australia later on in his travels. Thereafter, he was located in Geneva and London, working as a research and program officer for the United Nations, and specifically the Joint United Nations Program on HIV/AIDS. He returned to South Africa and started his academic career at the Department of Politics and International Relations at the University of Johannesburg, where he rose rapidly through the ranks to associate professor and also head of the department. But there's more. Then it was on to Macquarie University in Australia, after which he returned to South Africa as a specialist technical advisor at the AIDS Foundation of South Africa. And during his stint in Australia, he acted as head of the department there. He returned to this institution, the Department of Political Science, and went on to become a full professor, again quite rapidly, as well as chair of the department. Also served as Vice Dean for Social Sciences and Teaching and Learning between 2016 and 2021, while at the same time holding the position of Chair of the Department of Political Science and also Chair of our Higher Degree and Research Committee. So those of you in the know, with those three positions, holding that at the same time, I still don't know how you did it, Pieter. You don't have kids. But he has really made a major contribution, providing of his professional service to our faculty in all these capacities, including as a board member of our graduate school. And it's here at the department, obviously, and within the Dean's office that I really got to know Pieter very well. As a friend, Pieter is irreverent, has a great sense of humor, but he's also a very dedicated professional and someone with a large measure of integrity. That's how I got to know him in the Dean's office during a period when we went through some very difficult times. Thank you for that, Pieter. He's the author, the co-author, and editor of 10 books, focusing on the main of the political economy of HIV/AIDS in South Africa, but also the global political economy of health and health governance. His next co-authored book publication, I'm not sure whether it's out yet, Pieter, for next year, is on mental health policy in South Africa with a very interesting subtitle. I think it's Making Madness. He's authored and co-authored 21 book chapters, including one, which he just reminded me was his first publication with myself in 1997. Good heavens. If I remember correctly, was it on Latin America? Yeah. He has 33 peer-reviewed publications, among a whole host of non-peer-reviewed publications as well, and has presented papers at numerous national and international conferences. In addition to his academic publications, he's authored some 13 fiction publications, including the highly acclaimed The Heart is the Size of a Fist, and Ons Skulde, which as far as I know hasn't been translated yet. And I believe we can look forward to yet another, I don't know where you found the time, Pieter, to another novel from him next year with the title Die Dood van Rachel April. He's also a regular contributor to the media on issues of public and also literary interest. He was shortlisted for the Yanna Report Prize for Onschulde and shortlisted for the Kijknet Report Herman Bench Film Prize for Onschulde and longlisted for the National Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences Fiction Award for The Heart is the Size of a Fist. He is the book series editor for the Routledge Studies in Health in Africa and is on the editorial board of Social Dynamics, a journal of African Studies, and he was associate editor of the African Journal of AIDS Research. Beyond those research academic pursuits, I know for sure that he is a dedicated educator, both at the undergraduate and also the postgraduate level, where he's acted as mentor to countless of students and has a reputation for his engaging teaching style and his commitment to fostering critical thinking. He supervised and co-supervised some 40 master's students and 5 doctoral dissertations. In 2014, he received the Rector's Award for General Achievement at this institution, and in 2013, the Dean's Award for Research Output. Please join me in welcoming Pieter Fourie to the stage.
I wrote most of that chapter about Latin America, if I remember correctly. Eens kyk wie is allemaal hier. One of the surprising ways to have a deprived existence is to be granted exactly what you think you need. That vague desolation after a birthday party, the whiff of under or overreaction following the giving or the receipt of a wrapped present, that becalmed gloom that follows a consummated romantic pursuit, the professional stasis after your big promotion. Unspecified, unexpressed disaffection replaces the motive force of uncertainty and fear and becomes, offensively, ambition satisfied. In the second half of the 1990s, I completed my master's thesis and graduated with the result that I had hoped for. I secured a proper, grown-up job, moved to the capital city, and found my own decent place to live by myself. I wore ties and jackets, closed shoes. I had a day suit and an evening suit. I acquired 2 kittens. I had my hair cut every 3 weeks. I got a cell phone. I bought a lawnmower. Mouthwash became affordable. I no longer scoured the no-name branded bottom shelves in supermarkets for anything. Those splendid markers of adulthood, those little treats, that material validation. At work, I was encouraged to meet with professional financial advisors, men with calculators, perfect teeth, and reassuring smiles. I met with them at vast polished oak tables in high-ceilinged rooms, air conditioning hissing coolly. They imparted to me the mysteries of compound interest, as though they were riveting, delicious codes in a Dan Brown novel. All of this was imbued with an air of surreptitious, very serious desirability. I had a portfolio. Oh yes, I was on the inside now. Socially, I recall an overriding sense of being adrift in an age cohort that seemed to be shortlisting and test driving each other for copulation, cohabitation, matrimony, parenthood, and mortgages. They did this in novelty niche establishments like cigar bars and nationally themed food emporia. They drank spritzers and gin, imported beer. They experimented with cosmopolitan cheeses and bespoke gardening. They went to Toastmasters and discussed the merits of domestic water filters. The academic variants amongst them used the words narrative and unpack a lot. The religious ones formed home cell groups. I'm not being haughty. I was not above this. I wanted it too, and I tried to keep up. The romantics did not interest me, but I was contented to be the singleton, a vain, self-effacing odd number at a dinner party. I often found myself cast as the safety guest, the one relied upon to keep the conversation lubricated, calibrated, focused on our collective true north, assimilation and consumption. This did not offend me. I did it well. And yet, at work, I cultivated an image of and a reputation for earnest, quiet competence and an accommodating sense of humor. I was courteous and receptive to courtesy. People liked me, and I liked to be liked. And why not? I worked at a foreign embassy, and my boss was an eccentric man called David, the deputy ambassador. I wrote press releases, prepared speech notes, and fact-checked those sections of diplomatic cables that were not marked above my security clearance. David read my weekly political and economic reports in a listless, teasing monotone, with me sitting across from him at a desk, while on his shoulder he absently stroked a rubber chicken called Hector. David was a playful, strange man who called everyone by their title and surname. You knew you were in trouble only when he addressed you by your first name. Sometimes during lunch hour he could be spotted in the front rose garden reading Graham Greene novels or old Modesty Blaze comic strips. Everyone feared him and was a bit in love with him. The embassy security prescriptions meant that I was not allowed to do any work at home. No papers or electronic storage devices were allowed to be taken off embassy grounds, and all local staff had to leave the embassy by 16:06 every day. With half an hour for lunch, this worked out to a work week of 35 hours and 45 minutes, which was what the rules permitted. I was able to stop work and be home by just before 5 p.m. every day. I could feed the cats, prepare and have some dinner, and be in my pajamas with a book or a rented movie by well before 7 p.m. I seldom went out and never went to bed early, so I usually had an evening of many hours ahead of me. I went for late evening runs in well-appointed suburbs, dull, predictable, comfortable, private. I had been craving exactly this my entire life. I was safe. And yet, ennui, Weltschmerz, arrived early in 1999. I was on an international flight on the way back to South Africa after some training at HQ. Before I was able even to express discontent with how things were, I caught myself considering a menu of possible degrees to pursue part-time during my long solitary evenings after work. I suppose I was lonely, but I chose to express it to friends as a deficit of purpose. I needed to discover or make some meaning in my life. Clinical psychology was an option, so an acquaintance suggested that I do a course at Lifeline and consider volunteering as a telephone counsellor. I asked around, and despite objections about Lifeline offering only one kind of counselling, I went for it. I joined 2 groups of about 8 people each, who met at church hall on Thursday evenings for 14 weeks. We did trust exercises. We compiled personality collages. We reflected and shared. We exchanged secrets and expressed feelings. We practiced telephone dialogue scenarios. And at the end of training, we held hands in a big circle, listened to Mariah Carey sing Hero. The counselling was not for me, but it did alert me to the growing menace of AIDS in the country. By 1999, the HIV-related distress score started to come through at Lifeline, and at the embassy, the Development Assistance Office was planning to roll out well-funded AIDS orphan projects. My ennui had improved, though not dissipated, and so I volunteered to do some rudimentary scouting among the many AIDS orphanages applying for funding. I had vague but satisfyingly noble intentions to do some after-hours work with the non-government and community-based organizations. Deep in a township west of Pretoria was a large orphanage housed in what used to be a mission hospital. It was run by a priest, Father Gary, who was assisted by 10 or so community volunteers and 1 or 2 nurses. It was deep winter when I drove into the township in an embassy car to check out their operation. Winters in Gauteng are sharp and the air is thinly freezing. Regular cold is very cold indeed in a township. Father Gary took me on a tour of the ground floor. He was proud of the engineered efficiency of the kitchen, dining area, and playrooms. The laundry and storage facilities were at the back, with the outpatient care rooms on one side. Outside, there was a vast rose garden, and Gary explained to me that they plant 1 rose bush for every child that dies. This seemed both touching and disturbing to me as I sized up the square meterage that the garden demanded. All in all, the orphanage accommodated a couple of 100 children, ranging in age from infancy to around 7 years. Father Gary informed me matter-of-factly that HIV-positive children do not really survive beyond that. Who pays for all of this? I asked, and the priest responded with a laugh that he hopes I would, or rather, that my employer would. I nodded non-committally. Foreign embassies, a few private philanthropies, and 1 or 2 large corporates helped to pay the bill. The church paid Father Gary, I assumed. The priest wanted to know if I cared to see the hospice on the 3rd floor. I agreed without really thinking about it. As we walked up the stairs, I became aware of a confluence of smells, disinfectant and urine, not unlike what one would find in the more basic public hospitals in the country. There was a corridor of rooms, and in each room there were between 6 and 10 cots, depending on the size of a child. These were the dying children, the ones to be transubstantiated into the rose garden downstairs. I steeled myself and decided to view the rooms as units of utility and of noble care. The trick was not to view these kids as individuals. But then I saw her. I became aware of someone observing me. In a cot like all the others, there was a small naked child lying flat on a white sheet. Massive, distended stomach, emaciated. She had huge black eyes. Despite her rapid breathing, perspiring from the effort, and an evident lack of oxygen, she was the calmest person in the room. She had those eyes fixed on me. She looked to me to be about 9 months old. This is, Father Gary picked up a chart to read the details. This is baby Jay. She's 2 years old. He saw me react and explained that the virus impedes physical development, particularly when it is accompanied by such severe malnutrition. The priest was unsentimental. We call her Yanna, he said, but who knows what her real name is? Orphan, so no one comes to visit. She doesn't have long now. She has lung damage like you wouldn't believe, holes you can drive a truck through. Baby Jay stared at me, chicken chest going up and down, as she gasped, shining with sweat, eerily calm. She does belong now, said Father Gary again. You can touch her if you want. I declined. We left the room. 2 days later, I phoned the orphanage and asked to speak to Father Gary. Oh, hello, he said. Have you decided whether we're fundable? No, sorry, I said. That will be done by a committee after input from the provincial government. I was actually wondering how Yanna, baby Jay, is doing. She's dead, I'm sorry to say, said Father Gary. Got her rose this morning, matter of fact. I was quiet for a few seconds. Oh, I continued. I'm not a Catholic, Father, but I need to confess something to you. Ah, yes, he sounded a little bored, unsurprised. I feel so very guilty, I said, that I was unable to touch her, that I couldn't do it the other day. Oh, that, don't worry, my boy, he said, few people can cope in the circumstances. It sounded as though he wanted to get on with things, needed to get off the phone. Yes, I said, but I could have done it, and I didn't. And she had no one. I was a coward. What's your name again? Asked the priest. I told him. Well, Pieter, he said, maybe the point of your visit was not so that you could touch her, but that she could touch you. And that was what did it. That single sentence. Meaning, purpose. That was the moment in my life when I knew for certain what my professional focus would be. In some way or shape, I would from then on always work with the issues, poverty and disease that killed that little girl. A few months after this, I started my doctoral research on the political determinants and responses to AIDS in South Africa, and I am doing this still, decades later. I wish I could stop here. I do not want to add to this account, but if I do not, then this part of the truth would lack integrity. So here it is. 2 months or so later, my boss invites me into the restricted part of the embassy. There is a door with a touch code that local staff do not know. We never go in there. I walk into a room and there sits the head of the AIDS section, the development office. And next to her sits the ambassador, who is a very sympathetic man, though a political appointee and mostly absent. My boss sits next to him, and the three of them face me. David, my boss, says my first name, and now I know this is serious. Pieter, we're about to ask you something rather delicate. You do not have to agree to this. Okay, understood, I said. Of course, I didn't understand anything. David continued. There have been some rumors about the operation the good priest has out there in the township. I would like you as a local to look into it, to ask questions. Go see who have worked with him previously, that kind of thing. I shall not belabor this with an idealized account of what the intrigue was about. I investigated, I reported back to my superiors within a month. It turns out that Father Gary was a crook. He received payments to allow pharmaceutical companies to test dangerous experimental drugs on those in his care. He made a lot of dirty money that way. And he bullied those who threatened to expose him. The embassy never did fund that project. We retreated elegantly and remained sterile, selecting other worthy projects. I learned a number of lessons. I learned that not all angels are good. After all, angels and humans are siblings. I learned that tragedy and poverty beget whole industries and massive wealth. I learned that those crazy Marxists are onto something, that personal safety and pretentious class ambition help no one, that in fact they dull the rich and steal from the poor. At age 25, I was pretentious, chasing the shiny little trinkets of my trade. It took a dying child to save me and to refocus my attention on what matters. A life, a career, is a simple history of beginnings and endings. Not the big history of the universe, but the small history of an individual's facts, fears, and fictions. Life is a sequence of starts and stops, of decisions taken and of the consequences of those decisions. A single event can reverberate throughout an entire life. After my experience at the embassy, the quiet, profound significance of Yanna's invisible story, of my failure to touch her and her ability to touch me, has determined almost my entire professional life. If you look at my CV now, you see that the vast majority of my publications, my research projects, and my career choices reflect the impact of that one encounter in May 1999 in Attridgeville Township. The politics of health, locally, nationally, internationally, and multilaterally, became my focus. I can hardly think of a different topic, a different issue that so reflect political realities. The politics of health is a mirror of society. It determines most intimately, most immediately, who lives, who dies, who pays, who decides, who suffers, and who benefits. And so my intellectual and professional pursuits have centered on a lineup of global health issues. In CV, you will see publications, an incremental narrative on AIDS orphans, AIDS and human security, the securitization of health, the impact of health on state fragility, AIDS denialism and policymaking, the socio-political determinants of health, the politics of overseas development assistance, health and multilateral politics, and most recently a move towards neglected issues in health, the health politics of gender queerness, the politics of menstruation, the political construct of mental health. I have, over the past nearly 30 years, continuously moved in and out of academia and in and out of South Africa, working for the United Nations, for NGOs, and for other universities, all with a focus on health. In the process, I've learned fascinating and bewildering things. I'll mention a few. In a large future studies project during my time at UNAIDS, where our team was based at the energy giant Royal Dutch Shell's headquarters in London, I learned that my pro-UN and contra-oil company position was entirely misplaced and facile. I discovered the moral frailty, corruption, and racism of the UN versus the integrity of Shell's Future Scenarios Research Division. I did not expect that at all. I was shocked by the vanity of glam aid during my time with the AIDS Foundation of South Africa. A very well-known American talk show host sent a team to our office in Durban to prepare for her visit. Team Celebrity informed us that on the day of the celebrity's arrival, that they wanted children in the local township to be dressed in rags, and not, as we had planned, in their best clothes, to make the celebrity look good as she works the cameras during her 5 minutes with the young unwashed. I delighted in the courage of the AIDS Foundation's director, who told Oprah and her team to fuck off. I witnessed up close the power of money, of funding, and how it determines the so-called scientific outcome and findings of the projects that are funded. I had an opportunity to try my hand at espionage. I had a clandestine meeting during the worst days of Thabo Mbeki's AIDS denialism with someone very senior in the South African National Defence Forces Division for Medical Services. We met at a restaurant in Centurion. The nervous bureaucrat allowed me 5 minutes to write down the secret national AIDS statistics for uniformed ANDF personnel while he sat behind a newspaper and sunglasses at a table some distance from me. I learned lessons about the value of moving in and out of academia, of the links between research and teaching. And, maybe most significantly, I learned lessons about the power of telling stories, of writing down what happens to normal people, to the excluded, to the insignificant, as I'm doing right now. Albert Camus famously said that fiction is the lie through which we speak the truth. I learned much about this contradiction and the epistemology underpinning it during my time with the United Nations. Our ambition was to use Shell's futures methodology, scenario planning, to think strategically about the 20-year time horizon impact of AIDS across Africa. Our project was very well funded. We could do it properly and would spend 3 years developing and then roll out the scenarios. Scenarios are a fiction, of course, but a fascinating fiction, which have been used to great success by intelligence agencies, the private sector, the military, and governments to create among elites a shared vision of the future, to capture the imagination of decision makers and to take control of the future. Powerful stuff, And scenario planning has been used to great success during South Africa's political transition and thereafter. Scenarios are stories, little fictions, that are used to explore possible futures. In his novel Ignorance, the late Milan Kundera poses a question that is at the heart of scenario building exercises. Quote, how can a person with no knowledge of the future understand the meaning of the present? If we do not know what future the present is leading us towards, how can we say whether this present is good or bad, whether it deserves our concurrence or our suspicion or our hatred? End quote. Leaders have to take into account the shadow of that future on current decisions and policy making. When accurately constructed, scenarios can provide decision makers with what can seem to be prescient hindsight, an insight into what might occur when certain decisions are made. In this methodology, uncertainties seek to be the fodder that feed fear of the unknown. Rather, scenario methodologies provide an opportunity where uncertainties and objectivity can be embraced and examined, circumspectly exposing implications and consequences. In so doing, this methodology provides an interdisciplinary light in the tunnel vision inherent to the epistemic and ontological traps set by our various educations. Instead of suspicion and fear in the face of uncertainty and risk, scenario thinking frees an interdisciplinary collective by combining ostensibly incompatible understandings of what is real and knowable. It enables us to move beyond factual analysis, or those like demographers and economists who operate in fields that enable them to take greater quantitative risks, to go beyond the confines of modeling and projections that are themselves based on one specific way of seeing the world. Even before the counter-behavioralist revolution or movement in the social sciences, we have been searching for true intersubjectivity, that elusive meta-theoretical aspiration describing approximate objectivity through a more ideal confluence of appropriate subjectivities. The methodology of scenario building provides one such a portal to a truer qualitative reflection of what is real, what we can know, and how we should adapt our mental maps to a changing environment. Scenario methodology's unique insistence on radical transdisciplinary analyses combined with its horizontally integrated point of view rather than a self-insulating subject-specific vertical focus can be the stone to break the mirrors that merely reflect our own predictable view of what the present is. The successful application of scenario methodology, whether it leads to the building of incremental or normative or deductive or inductive scenarios, all these things exist, is based on a profound curiosity about and tolerance for the unknown, of that which is uncertain but significant. Scenario building teaches us to look below the journalistic surface of things, beneath the events of daily life, and to seek out a more authentic understanding of the deeper structures that continuously determine the patterns of our existence. This methodology allows an inimitable perspective on the sociocultural, technological, and political economic drivers of change. And it is only once we fearlessly embrace these uncertainties that the patterns will start to be apparent. In a nutshell then, scenario methodologies and so-called future studies are used to evoke innovative thinking about the future, not the future based on one single set of assumptions about the present, for that would be mere forecasting or an attempt at crystal gazing, but rather a set of different futures based on different assumptions about the present, as well as the different paths that might be taking us to alternative futures. Such qualitative analysis is then combined with quantitative methodologies. The different sets of assumptions are modeled by economists, demographers, actuaries, and others who do mysterious things with numbers. The key strength of future methodology is that they reveal to us what might happen, rather than what we want the future to be. They help us to think the unthinkable and to plan accordingly. Scenario building implies choice and therefore hope. And that ain't bad for a methodology based on fiction. Of course, fiction as a vocation has forever reflected on the world of politics, also global politics. John le Carré, William Shakespeare, Margaret Atwood, and many, many others I have forever been using fiction to conscientize and to entertain us about the dynamics of power, interpersonal, domestic, international. Examples abound. Game theory in The Hunt for Red October, realism in any Robert Ludlum novel, strategic studies in The Lord of the Rings, constructivism in The Game of Thrones, gender in Atwood. Despite my own participation in several scenario projects over the past 2 decades, and then sometimes writing up the results as part of my research portfolio, it was only a few years ago that I started to think about using fiction in my own pedagogy. In 2017, Margaret Orr, the management coach in the rector's office, pushed me to do something less orthodox academically and to develop my own creativity. Margaret claimed that this would inject some joy into my life. Margaret was right. Long story short, a few novels resulted. And yes, my life has been more joyful. And then a couple of years ago, I started to look into the possibility of using fiction in my own teaching of international relations. Not just by referring to books or movies, but by developing my own students' creativity in identifying, describing, and understanding global power dynamics. You can imagine my delight when only 3 months ago, the brand new 500-plus page Oxford Handbook of International Studies Pedagogies included for the first time whole chapters exploring the use of the arts and creativity to help students craft and internalize fresh ways of doing international relations. From experience in the real world, I have a sense of what value this can add to policymakers or diplomats or spies or analysts or politicians or journalists or academics' understanding of the world. If I survive Trump 2.0, I will have just over a decade left in this job. It is my intention to proceed joyfully, to tell the stories that matter, and to explore innovative ways of doing it, also with my students. Why? Because stories have a way of giving life to the world. They cultivate a radical empathy that complements rather than contradicts dispassionate analysis. When you leave here tonight, you will, for a day or two, have a vague intellectualized recollection of what I said about scenario methodology and ontology and epistemology and intersubjectivity. But you will retain, I suspect, a much more lasting and profound sense of what I told you about baby Yanna and the lessons that I learned from her, from how she touched me and touches me still. And that is the power of stories, of accounts about normal lives. It is my sincere hope that this new way of doing my scholarship, and especially my teaching, will help me to perform those 3 essential tasks of anyone who gets to be called professor: to study and to know the world and to be appalled by it, to instill hope, to develop agency amongst our students, to change this world for the better, to do all of this joyfully as much as possible through the cultivation of creative, critical thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, Pieter, for sharing your story with us. And you are right. I do think we will carry the story of baby Yanna or baby Jay with us. I think many of us thought we would come here to hear you and for you, but I think you've touched our lives like baby Jay touched yours. So thank you so much for sharing that very personal story. And also reflecting on the power of fiction. So if I think of fiction, it's sometimes to escape, it's sometimes to make sense. And you've also told us this evening that it unleashes creativity and innovation to apply in the real life. So using the lie to seek the truth in real life. So thank you so much. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And all the best for your
so
future
much.
endeavors.
The Registrar, Dr. Retief, and the Dean of Law, Professor Smith, the Dean of Arts and Social Sciences, Professor Leysens, the Vice Deans, Professor Roos and Professor Heineken, Professor Feinauer, and Professor Swart, I greet you and I thank you and your respective divisions on behalf of Pieter Fourie and the Department of Political Science for your support of the special evening. Colleagues, friends, family of Professor Fourie, thank you for persevering and insisting on being here, in spite and despite the protestations of Pieter. Professor Pieter Fourie, congratulations. I know that this event has been a long time coming, I think 8 years, and you are a well-entrenched professor. But thank you that we could celebrate with you. This is an important event for all of us to be reminded of the academic project. I am often amused by the shock of people when I have to explain to them, no, we as academics are not on holiday when the students are on holiday and when the teaching term is over. And as we are celebrating tonight, the academic project, and in Pieter's case, the right to profess, is rather the culmination of decades of reflecting, researching, postgraduate supervision, teaching, presenting, writing, publishing, and in your case, writing novels and now storytelling, as you had us enthralled this evening. On behalf of Pieter and the Department of Political Science, I would like to thank those who have made this event possible. To the inaugural lecture working group, thank you very much. To, as well as those collaborators, including the marketing team, communications team, lighting, those with refreshments, photography. Thank you for your excellence in putting this important event together. Friends, families, colleagues, thank you again for your support of Pieter and being here, whether in person or online. And now it's up to me to wrap this all up. So let's continue the celebration over wine and refreshments, for which I have no idea where they are, and I assume that we will be told. But thank you very much, everybody. Since I've done this before, could you please stand as the academic procession leaves? Thank you.